Hello. Today we'll be talking about the discussion board article written by Chalmers Johnson. The title of it is "Blowback: U.S. Actions Abroad Have Repeatedly Led to Unintended Indefensible Consequences." And so this author is probably the most controversial one that we will have in any of our articles, and you're either going to like him or hate him. And he has, I think, been deceased now for a few years at least. But at any rate, in the article, he is very polarizing about his beliefs when it comes to America's unwanted intrusions in world affairs to promote its interest. He goes about defining blowback, one of the major terms in the article, as a CIA, Central Intelligence Agency term, first used back in the early 1950s, and it represents the unintended consequences of the U.S. government's international activities that have been kept secret from the American people. And so he believes this has gone on for decades, and he gives example after example where America has basically stuck its nose into other countries' business when they were unwelcome, and then eventually this comes back as an attack or some sort of terrorism, and this is, of course, what he means by blowback. So in the beginning of the article, he paints a scene where people are searching for their loved ones, running about, panicked because they're either dead or just they don't know their whereabouts, and this is happening in many countries over the last several decades, 4 or 5 decades. And the reason they're doing this is because of American military operations that have occurred, or either American supported military operations by other countries. And of course this leads to conflict, which leads to the shedding of blood and the human misery that he's trying to show in the beginning of the article. Now this has ultimately come home to roost for us as Americans in the form of 9/11, when many people were doing the very same thing, trying to find loved ones based off those attacks. And Johnson says, well, you shouldn't be surprised that this is happening or has happened. And now America knows how it is to search for their loved ones, or as it is termed in the article, the disappeareds. Chalmers goes on to say that America's military might is unmatched in the world and has been that way for some time. And really the only way an enemy can attack America is through the terrorism attacks, or what the military and Pentagon refers to as asymmetrical attacks. The point of terrorism, to Johnson, is to draw attention to the sins of the invulnerable, or in this case the American military complex, for what they have done through these interventions that he believes they should not be doing at all. It seems in the article that Chalmers distrusts his government thoroughly. He does have military service as well, but so he does have that experience, but he seems to be distrusting completely of the government. He shows that any of America's enemies can be found to have been supported or been attacked by the American military. So he shows us Osama bin Laden, Manuel Noriega, and Saddam Hussein are all listed as examples, and he gives a little detail for each of those figures. And so later on, when these individuals attack us later in time, he just thinks, well, this is eventually the price that has to be paid for these type of actions. And the government, American government, is to blame. He also believes that America, uses more than its fair share of the world's natural resources. So while we only have 4% of the population, we consume 40% of its resources. And so he's trying to paint a picture of why distrust, dislike for Americans might be there by the rest of the world. He also defines collateral damage, and that is a phrase often used to indicate where innocents are killed in these type of conflicts, that in pursuing the real targets, then sometimes innocent civilians are hit. He goes on to say and show many examples where American politicians, were unconcerned about collateral damage after 9/11. And so again, he's going to show how that comes home to roost against Americans by some of the terrorist actions, not only in the United States, but especially the United States, but in other parts of the world too. Chalmers disapproves of all of these types of actions, and he says not only the suffering, but higher energy prices and damaged economies are just additional prices that will have to be paid if you pursue such policies. He believes there is a solution to it and actually discusses it in the rest of the article, but he never or does not believe that it will ever be acted upon by politicians in Washington. But as he ends the article, he does give his solution. So first of all, it would be simply redefining where American military presence is needed versus not needed. Closing down bases that produce some of the people like Osama bin Laden and Manuel Noriega, for example, is also a solution to him. He names the U.S. Army School of the Americas as really nothing more than a factory that puts out bad apples, and names quite a few as examples of people who went out and started to wreak havoc based on what they were taught in these type of schools. In this case, he suggests simply to close it down. The amount of American money or American taxpayer money that goes to the American military complex is another example or a possible solution. Simply to cut down the amount that is given to it is one possible solution there by Johnson. He also accuses the U.S. military of being a weapons dealer, of selling more weapons and military equipment and weapons than any other nation on earth or any other institution on earth, and also charging U.S. servicemen in Okinawa of raping girls, women, and children, and also using Hollywood to help propagandize the gloriousness that we see in military service. He also suggests that America as a nation wouldn't be so dependent on airplanes if it had a much better railroad system like Europe does, and to also nationalize public utilities. So it seems he is a socialist there and arguing for socialist policies. And he concludes by saying that if we do not do these things, or if we do not change our current course and policy on these type of tactics with blowback, then we will go the way of the former Soviet Union and basically be a world power that disappears overnight because of the internal conditions and crumbling that occurred there. Johnson believes that's America's fate as well. So these are some of my thoughts on the article. Hope it helps you as you begin to write your post, and also make sure you upload it to the discussion board. Thank you. Hello?